Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, what provoked a seemingly nice kid from Silver Spring to become the Columbia Mall shooter? Who is Cherri Branson, and why was she chosen to finish Valerie Irvin's term on the county council? Is Beretta moving its gun manufacturing plant to Tennessee? And which 21 This Week panelist is running for lieutenant governor? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former Majority Leader of the Maryland House of Delegates, John Hurson. Conservative activist, Jerry Cave. Immediate past President of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. And political consultant, Rich Parsons. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. And welcome back. The number of candidates in both political parties seeking to succeed Martin O'Malley as Maryland's governor continues to expand. This week, Annapolis businessman and former Ehrlich administration official Larry Hogan announced that he was running in the Republican primary. 21 This Week panelist Boyd Rutherford was named as Hogan's running mate for lieutenant governor. Mark, Hogan is entering a crowded field with David Craig, Ron George, and Charles Lawler already seeking the Republican nomination. What chances do you give Team Hogan to win the nomination?
Well, he has come in with a lot of buzz. He's picked a lieutenant governor nominee. The expectation is that compared with the other Republican candidates, he's the one who has the best chance to get financing. So we'll see. I think he has a competitive nature and will be somebody who knows the issues in Maryland.
Rich, the Baltimore Sun, among others, attacked Michael Steele for being a turncoat because he was a black Republican when he was first nominated for lieutenant governor. Is Boyd Rutherford going to be subjected to the same kind of attacks?
You know, I don't think so, Casey. I think a lot of the attacks on Michael Steele kind of fall in the category of self-inflicted wounds. I think he made some statements that opened him up for attack in many occasions. Nice guy, but I think that was the explanation. I think he's going to have a good shot and I think a good chance, as Mark indicated, of being on the winning ticket on the Republican side this year.
Not that it matters, right?
Right, not that it matters much.
Now, that's not what I said. I stopped before that.
All right, John, things are getting interesting in the Democratic Party because rumors are that John Delaney, the newly elected congressman, is thinking about running because of the stumbles that Attorney General Gansler have had and the fact that Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown isn't catching fire. What do you hear?
Well, I think that's all true. There's a lot of rumors out there about what Congressman Delaney is going to do. I have been hearing, though, that he's not going to run and that he will stay in the Congress. He's only, he just has one term in the Congress, but he is wealthy and could finance his own campaign if he wanted to at the last minute. But I just don't see that happening. I think what's happening here is you're seeing the floating of the name for future purposes politically, but I don't think he's going to run.
Okay, Jerry, let's pick up on a point that Mark talked about, and that was the fundraising aspect of it. Even the Baltimore Sun observed that Democratic candidate Heather Mazier, whom we interviewed last week on this show, has 3 times the campaign funds that all of the Republican candidates put together have. So why does Larry Hogan and Boyd Rutherford have a chance in that kind of a situation?
Because those fat cat 1% Democrats are going to need every penny of it because they're going to spend most of it fighting each other. And when that's over, Larry Hogan's going to be waiting for him just like a spider. Surprise them all in the can.
All right. Now that you've done the party line, let's be real.
Those were all new lines. That was new material, Casey.
All right. Let's talk about the primary and why
Larry Hogan can raise money. Mark just told you that, and you know he can do it. And the oxygen was sucked out of the primary. Primary's over. Larry Hogan won the primary over. Won the primary the day he announced.
And why did he do that, Cherri?
Because
you're missing the point.
He's had
Jerry.
The media going for the last 4 years on Change Maryland. He's been planning this for years. He's experienced. And let's face it, when it comes down to this stuff, being Irish does help, Casey.
All right. You know, Mark, Jerry is shooting all around the target, but he fails to hit it. The reason that Hogan is going to do well is because he's inherited the Ehrlich machine.
Actually, I think he's gone, with Change Maryland, he has gone well beyond that and has tapped into a lot of the angst that grassroots Republicans and conservatives and conservative Democrats, moderate Democrats have about the direction of the state. And I think that gives him something beyond being Ehrlich.
One other thing as a Democrat. The Hogan name has been around a long time in Republican circles. And I actually think from a the Republican Party might react to form rather than going with the Tea Party here and say, this is a guy we know, this is a guy who can pull everybody together. Rutherford's a great choice. I mean, I worked with that guy when I was chairman of the Health and Government Operations Committee. It's a good choice. So I think Democrats need to perceive this as a very serious election, very serious challenge.
Well, does that suggest that we might be in a situation where Ehrlich actually won several years ago if you have a weak candidate on the Democratic side? It's
going to be hard. It's going to be harder now.
Casey just put his, you did just hit the target. The candidates matter. As Democrats in the state learned not too long ago with Ellen Sowerby almost winning elections that nobody thought she would even be competitive in. She was ending up very competitive, but a lot of that has to do with the depth and the experience and the positioning of the Democratic candidate in this race. And you've got a lot of problems right now with Anthony Brown and the whole issue of the health care debacle in Maryland. Gansler's run into some headwinds as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of a Democratic candidate emerges. And I think I'm with John. A lot of people end up regretting looking past an election and assuming that it's over.
Some of the Democratic political consultants that I talk to talk about the fact that Gansler's fundraising hasn't been robust of late. And they use that as a sign that his campaign is in trouble. Are they correct?
Well, I see a lot of, he's been getting better media coverage lately, I've noticed. And one of the things you got to remember is, most of the voters in this state are not on the far left and they're certainly not on the far right. They are in the middle, and that's kind of the positioning of the messaging that's coming out of that campaign now. So always keep your eye on where the voters are, and Casey, and even in a state like Maryland, they tend to cluster in the middle of the political spectrum.
John, we got to wrap this up.
A former governor who I spoke to recently said to me, you've got two behemoths in the Democratic primary, and all they've got is money. They don't have grassroots. They don't have a grassroots organization. They're going to throw all that money at each other in the primary, and that does two things. One, it opens a path for somebody to come through in the primary to win that primary who's not the two. And number two, it helps the Republicans. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to be concerned about on the Democratic side.
We're going to a hard break. John made the point. The Democratic primary is going to be fascinating to watch. All right, last year, in a very major flourish of legislative muscle, Martin O'Malley pushed through one of the toughest gun control laws in the country. Italian gun maker Beretta, which has a manufacturing plant right here in Prince George's County, openly opposed the controversial gun control bill because it banned some of the very firearms manufactured by Beretta here in the state. John, Beretta just announced that this week it's opening a plant to build new firearms in Tennessee. Is that a reaction to the gun law that was just passed?
Well, let's just be clear. The Beretta announcement was that they were opening a plant in Tennessee, but they were not closing the Maryland plant. They were opening the Tennessee plant for expansion. Is that a signal to Maryland? Yeah, it could be. I mean, that's not, unheard of in corporate circles, that they're signaling that, hey, we're not really happy with where Maryland's going. But they have a long history here. I don't think the Maryland plant's in trouble. I hope it's not. But I don't, I'm a policy wonk. I don't think policymakers should be reacting to just this issue, of a plant moving if they want to enact gun control laws.
Question, John. If the law hadn't been passed, would those 350 jobs likely be in Maryland with an expansion of the plant in Prince George's County?
Casey, I have no idea. I have no idea. I really don't. But the honest thing about it is Beretta's keeping its plant here. At least they say they are. And I don't think lawmakers can be threatened by that. I mean, they just have to make their own decisions about policy.
All right, Jerry, is the Beretta plant in Tennessee the camel's nose under the tent, and we're going to see the Beretta manufacturing plant in Prince George's County slipping away?
I don't know, but as much as you might worry about 350 jobs in Maryland, what I'm more worried about is FBI statistics. And the last year they kept them for, we had 369 people get murdered in the state of Maryland. Our murder rate's 39% higher than across the river. And the difference? They have two-party rule, dominated by Republicans, and they have much lower
Jerry,
gun laws. And
stick
they're
to the
making
point.
gun restriction. I am. You're talking about 350 jobs, so let's move the chairs on the Titanic. What's more important, Casey? 350 jobs or 369 murders? And if we had a murder rate like Virginia, over 100 people would still be alive.
Well, the question here today that we're talking about
I said,
is
I
whether
don't
or
know,
not the policy,
you don't know,
whether the
nobody
policies,
knows what Beretta is thinking.
But don't the policies that the legislature and the governor enacts, don't they cause businesses to react and make business decisions that's in their self-interest?
It's not so much a business decision because they can still make those guns in Maryland and not have a problem unless they make another stupid law. But when you insult people, they're likely to take their business elsewhere. And that may be what is going to happen in the future.
Rich, weigh in on this.
Well, you raise a good point, Casey, in that businesses react to even symbolic gestures by elected officials. If you recall the Lockheed Martin response when the county council started to act like a U.S. Congress or like it had something to say about U.S. foreign policy, which it doesn't and shouldn't. But there's also there's a lot of great things about Maryland. But one of the things, to your point, Casey, you have to keep an eye on our competitiveness as a business climate, because it's not just this one case and the 350 jobs involved with Beretta. It's how we're advancing the competitiveness of Maryland as a place to locate a business in general. And there's a lot of improvement that we should be shooting for. Jerry's point about the homicide rate in Virginia, don't forget, Maryland is the most urbanized state in the United States per capita, and crime rates are absolutely correlated with the rate of population density and urbanization. So his comparison is completely off base with Virginia. Virginia's a much more rural state, so of course it has a lower crime rate.
The murder rate coincides with the concentration of Democratic leadership.
No, it coincides with population density and urbanization.
Then why does New York have a lower murder rate than Baltimore?
We're getting off track.
I want to keep it back on track on the fact that business is an issue here, and Maryland has to continually fight to maintain a business-friendly reputation.
Why has our governor increased taxes and fees 40 to 80 times in the last 6 years?
Jerry, you're going to have the last word. We're going to have to leave it at that because we're going to a break. When we come back from this short break, what provoked a seemingly nice young man from Silver Spring to become the Columbia Mall shooter? And who is the newly hired county council member, Cherri Branson? Stay tuned. And welcome back to the next adventures of Toxic Avenger. All right, the Montgomery County Council announced this week that Cherri Branson was going to be selected to serve out the remaining 11-month term of Valerie Irvin for the 5th District County Council seat. Rich, did the County Council choose Ms. Branson because she was the least controversial or the best qualified applicant?
Well, the biggest reason was that she was absolutely clear that she was not going to seek the seat in the long term. So the County Council took that very much into consideration, and also she is a pretty non-controversial choice by all accounts.
John, at least for now, Ms. Branson has a full-time job on Capitol Hill with the House Homeland Security Committee. How is she going to do 2 jobs?
I mean, technically, the fiction is that as a county council member, you can hold an outside job, given their schedules and stuff. I think it's fiction. I think it'll be very difficult for somebody to be at that level in Congress and that level of job, particularly in Homeland Security, which is not exactly a sleepy committee, to actually do this. So I think it's going to be very hard. It is a challenge for every elected official to balance these 2 things when supposedly the elected job is a part-time job, which supposedly this is.
Jerry, you serve with Ms. Branson on the County Charter Review Commission. What do you know about her?
She's a lovely lady. She's very intelligent. She's very versed on the issues. And I think you should know that there's a common denominator between Boyd and Cherri, is that I'm on the commission with Cherri, and I've been on this panel with Boyd, and that's the common denominator to getting selected. So you all have good things in your future.
So we're doing 7 degrees of separation of Jerry Cave? Is that the...
I didn't want to be that blatant, but
is that
a case could be made for that.
You know, Kevin Bacon, eat your heart out.
Glad I'm here today.
Well, what I hear about Ms. Branson is that not only is she very competent and very intelligent, but that she intends to give up her position on the committee. That was kind of an unstated promise that she made to the county council, and that she was one of the least controversial selections because she didn't have an axe to grind one way or the other. And when you get appointed by a county council, as political as ours is, that's a very high requirement. All right, I think we'll see what she does in the next coming months. I wish her all good things. And I'm hoping that Valerie Irvin will join us back on the panel one of these days. We've talked about it. All right, this past Saturday, 19-year-old Darian Marcus Aguilar, a graduate of Hubie Blake High School right here in Silver Spring, he took out a shotgun and he killed 2 people. And then he killed himself at a retail store at the mall in Columbia. Little is known about Aguilar other than the fact that one day he went on a killing spree. Mark, this is an impossibly hard question to try to put into context, but we've seen so many of these incidents over the years. We saw it at Sandy Hook, we saw it in Colorado. How do you put this into context?
You know, you've touched on one of the things that makes this so difficult is there were no warning signs, at least from all the news accounts. And so some of the processes that may have worked in another context, the database that we maintain of mental illness, and none of that would have helped in this situation.
John, you know, it's so hard to put this into context, but we've talked about the mental health aspects of it. From his journals, it seems like this was a troubled young man. How can we prevent these future crimes from happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example of how, you know, the traditional politically correct solutions that everybody talks about never would have worked here. I mean, the idea that you have a background check, it's not going to work here. You know, what we need, and we are going to have to, you know, figure out as a society how to invest in this, is a much more comprehensive training of local school officials, parents, about seeing these kids in trouble. This is a family that, you know, broke apart right before this happened, about a year before this happened. His parents divorced. You know, this is a kid who was mentally in trouble. How do you identify that? How do you get school officials to see it? How do you get parents to see it? How do you get this kid into treatment? How do you get this out? And frankly, the only way is really to invest in mental health services. I mean, I chair a panel that hands out grants to all kinds of, you know, local clinics and stuff in the state of Maryland. We had an excellent presentation from the Frederick County Mental Health Association the other day. These are the kinds of groups we need to invest in because they're out there on the front lines trying to get these kids treatment, and that's what we have to do.
Well, we saw this in Virginia with Cray Deed's son, also doing something horrible and horrific.
Well, John raises a good point about the importance of investing in a better mental health system across the board, and just to be, you know, honest about our expectations, you're never going to have any system that you can devise that deals with every one of these cases. Correct. And this one's particularly tough. Correct. But we as a society have to take, I think, more responsibility to be each other's keeper and just keep an eye and say something when we see
but how are we going to know?
Someone's life and be there.
The Dunkin' Donuts where this young man worked, I've been to that Dunkin' Donuts almost every time I go to College Park. How do you identify it? Jerry?
We have to be big boys about this and be adults. There are over 300 million people in this country. The likelihood that somebody is dangerously deranged is inevitable. There's over 300 million guns if you never sold another one. The chances of the intersection of those two is inevitable in this country. Now, look at the statistics. In Newtown and Columbine, 20 people were killed. In Arapahoe and this place, 2 people were killed. We were just lucky in Columbia Mall that he decided to quit at 2. But the reason there was only 2 killed in Arapahoe was because the shooter found out there was a good guy in the building with a gun and he killed himself. My son went to a school where the teachers carried concealed weapons and the students marched around with weapons. A shooter was not coming into that school. It was a disincentive, and if they had, they would not have killed 20 people.
Well,
This may not be a pretty way to look at it,
arm
but
everybody,
these statistics
Jerry.
are true.
The so-called good guy with a gun theory goes crashing and burning when you look at the other movie theater case in the news recently, where a nice law-abiding man, a family man, father, husband, was gunned down by an ex-cop with a concealed weapons permit.
And it was one.
Over
a
stupid argument over texting.
Right.
The point is, that dangerous intersection Jerry talked about is absolutely true. We've got a lot of mentally ill people, a lot of guns. We've got to do what we can to prevent as many of these as we can, knowing it's never going to be perfect.
You can never bore down mental health-wise enough to solve every problem.
Right, which is why we also have to control the guns. We've got to do more.
Well, that's the
completely agree. You know,
one
in the old
area.
days,
The
they
one
used-
area we're going to agree. It's awful, and we need to do more. We'll talk about it more in the weeks ahead. Stay tuned for Parting Shots. And now with Parting Shots, Rich Parsons.
Well, here we are in another election year, and we've been talking about it a bit on this show. And in fact, we may have some real drama in the state of Maryland in the November elections, which is always the temptation of everyone to think of November elections. But in Montgomery County and in most of the races in this state, it's not the November elections that actually determine the outcome. It's critically important to get out there to the news media when you talk about the elections, to talk about the primary election, which is coming up in June this year. That first week of June is when we're going to have early voting. A lot of the local races, sorry to the Republicans on the panel, but they're going to be decided in that June primary. We have abysmal turnout in Montgomery County in primary elections, and that's got to change. Everybody put down the first week of June in your calendars and get out there and vote in the primaries this year.
Thank you, Rich. John Hurson, your parting shot.
My parting shot is going to actually be to a whole group of families in Montgomery County in the state of Maryland, and actually to one of our panelists, Rich Parsons, who have children who are competing potentially in the Olympics in Sochi, who dedicate their lives to actually going out and helping their kids to really get geared up to compete. That's a huge effort, commitment on the part of parents, and my shout out goes to them because I probably never could have done it for my kids. They never had that talent, so congratulations, Rich.
Thank you, John. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
Casey, this week we're on up against, at least for the 7 o'clock airing, I know we have a number of airings during the course of the week, but our 7 o'clock on Sunday night airing is up against the Super Bowl. And I just want to say to our audience out there, if you're watching at 7 o'clock and it's Sunday night, thank you very much. You are very, very impressive to be that dedicated to Maryland and Montgomery County politics.
Buy you a car.
And I'll buy you a car.
Mark,
no.
Mark, I thought you were going to tell them that they needed a life. Jerry, your parting shot.
Larry Hogan's going to make this gubernatorial contest a lot tougher than the Democrats think they are. And I hope he goes beyond just the pocketbook issues, which are very important, but the Democratic Party is 100% responsible for everything in this state. The gun issue that we're talking about, the murder rate in Baltimore that's 50% higher than Chicago, but there's a great contrast. Wisconsin was a Democratic state. It was in economic doldrums. A Republican took it over. He took it from having billion-dollar deficits to having $1 billion surplus, and he made it systemic, and he gave the money back to people. And I hope Marylanders remember that when they go to the polls in November.
Thank you, Jerry. And panel, thank you for being here this evening. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in to Montgomery County's hardest hitter political talk show. And remember, you can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.